2000s had a lot of huge bands set the tone for that decade both in quality and variety. Last time I asked Google Bard, possibly the funniest of AI, to list off the top 10 worst 2000s rock bands. This time, we check what Barty thinks are the best. I simply put into Google Bard's prompt, list off the top 10 rock bands of the 2000s and give reasoning for each entry. 30 seconds later, I was given a full list with this response.
Here is my ranking of the top 10 rock bands of the 2000s based on their commercial success, critical acclaim, and influence on the genre.
Barty the metal-loving robot has some surprising choices for this list of 2000s rock that I was not expecting. Also, if you checked out the worst 2000s rock bands choices Barty made, you'll be confused by at least one entry on this list. Please subscribe, it does help the channel a lot. You know how these videos work. Let's look at the top 10 best 2000s rock bands from Google Bard.
10. The Strokes. The Strokes was one of the most influential rock bands of the 2000s. They released their debut album, Is This It?, in 2001, which is considered one of the most important rock albums of the decade. The Strokes was also known for their garage rock sound and their cool, laid-back image.
I actually think the Strokes were quite underrated for their output past Is This It?, which made them a big deal in the garage rock explosion. One of the most important rock albums of that decade? Maybe. I mean, it was a big deal. Is that enough to make the Strokes one of the best 2000s rock bands? I'm not sure. I mean, 2000s The Strokes really is what people think about when they hear the name of the band, especially a song like Last Night. So I'm not sure if I would have put the Strokes on this list of the best rock bands of the 2000s, but I guess I don't have too much of an argument for them being here either. This is a no-frills garage rock band, and in a decade with fads and subgenres, the Strokes just showed up and played and threw mic stands down and looked like they didn't care. Or in the words of Barty, had a cool laid-back image. Proof, though, you can make your band work without a gimmick or certain stage presence. Just show up and play well.
9. My Chemical Romance. My Chemical Romance was one of the most popular rock bands of the 2000s. They released 3 studio albums in the decade, all of which went platinum or multi-platinum. My Chemical Romance was also known for their emo lyrics and their theatrical live shows.
For all the albums that came from My Chem to the huge visual of being emo leaders from 3 Cheers to the Black Parade, My Chemical Romance really dominated that decade. This was a smart choice for the list, and Barty the metal elitist apparently has a soft spot for anthems for the brokenhearted. Along with many other people, I wonder how My Chemical Romance's career would have changed had they not ended after Danger Days, but when you look at the body of work they put out in the 2000s, the massive tours, even getting to perform on Saturday Night Live, that is a lot of accomplishments in less than 10 years. The music still holds up from the 2000s, the iconic look they had helped set them apart while also inspiring a subgenre. My Chemical Romance belongs here. Now, seeing it on this list, it would be weird if it wasn't here, and I'm glad that Barty is looking past standard rock acts, but is looking in different sound eras and styles. Good robot.
8. Coldplay. Coldplay was one of the most popular rock bands of the 2000s. They released 3 studio albums in the decade, all of which went platinum or multi-platinum. Coldplay was also known for their anthemic songs and their soaring melodies.
I'm willing to bet no one saw Coldplay coming on a list like this. Regardless of how you feel about Coldplay and their music, especially over the last 10 plus years, Coldplay dominated so much music in the alternative side, and to the point that the band transcended genre. By Google Bard's definition, they are a rock band, and I know that statement will upset some people. The fact that Google Bard scoured the internet and chose Coldplay as one of the best rock bands of the 2000s isn't as surprising when you look at album sales, concert success, song charting, movie soundtracks. Coldplay did it all, including releasing 4 albums in the 2000s, not 3. Barty got that bit of info wrong. Me personally, 2000s Coldplay is solid. After that it gets ugly, but I admit I wouldn't have ever thought to put Coldplay on a list like this. Barty has much more of a soft side though and wants some crooning Chris Martin and soaring melodies on his rock playlist. That's adorable.
7. Radiohead. Radiohead was one of the most critically acclaimed rock bands of the 2000s. They released 3 studio albums in the decade, all of which were critically acclaimed. Radiohead was also known for their experimental sound and their willingness to push the boundaries of rock music.
Looking at what Radiohead would become as a band after the end of the 90s, it's amazing to hear the evolution through those years and the increase in sound writing and performance. There were 4 albums released if you count Kid A in 2000, which I do, and that experimental side was what won people over and giving Radiohead the spotlight every time they released an album. From Kid A to In Rainbows, Radiohead became something exceptional in a time where experimental rock was not the popular sound. sound. This was a 90s band that decided to do more than the song Creep and prove they could make it work. They pushed their own boundaries in rock. It's another case of I'm not sure if I would have put them on the best of 2000s rock bands list if I had made it, but I really don't have much of an argument for it either. Barty's all over the place though on this list, and Tom York going wild on a synthesizer is just another wrinkle on this list.
Well, somebody told me you had
6. The Killers. The Killers was one of the most successful rock bands of the 2000s. They released 2 studio albums in the decade, both of which went platinum or multi-platinum. The Killers was also known for their catchy songs and their stylish image.
Electronic-infused rock that truly embraced something different with hot fuss and did not look back. When I think 2000s rock, The Killers fits perfectly on a list like this for one of the best bands to come out of that era. The Killers embodied that time perfectly when they blew up and are still remembered for it in that era. Even the naysayers who argue about the band never releasing something as strong as their debut cannot argue how big of a deal The Killers were in the mid-2000s, and that continued to grow around the world, not just domestically. Also, think about a world without Mr. Brightside and Somebody Told Me. Not just rock, but all music would be missing out. The Killers released 3 studio albums in the 2000s though, not 2. Barty has an issue with counting up releases from bands including The Killers. Maybe he got confused and distracted when he started listening to Sam's Town and complaining about how not enough people gave it a chance. That's a fair reason though.
5. Muse. Muse was one of the most popular rock bands of the 2000s. They released 3 studio albums in the decade, all of which went platinum or multi-platinum. Muse was also known for their theatrical live shows and their eclectic mix of genres, including rock, metal, and electronica.
Another entry that is perfect for a list like this. 2000s Muse is best Muse, and that band was untouchable in that decade. Just the combination of Absolution and Black Holes would be enough to warrant Muse being in the discussion for best 2000s rock bands. Totally agree with this choice along with the description of what sets Muse apart. Muse's recent music aside, you have to go back to the mid and late 2000s where Muse was on another level with live performances and epic electronic rock singles that made people stop and want to find out more about the band on first listen. 2000s Muse had that impact. Barty was once again bad about counting as Muse released 4 studio albums from 2001 to 2009. Google Bard gets a good entry with Muse and then just skips an album, I guess. Makes you wonder which one. Maybe The Resistance? After Black Holes and Revelations, I guess Barty just saw that as the peak and didn't count anything else. Regardless, Barty made a good pick here.
4. Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters was another successful rock band of the 2000s. They released 4 studio albums in the decade, all of which went platinum or multi-platinum. Foo Fighters also won 4 Grammy Awards in the 2000s, including Best Rock Album for There Is Nothing Left to Lose.
I love Foo Fighters, and they did win the Best Rock Grammy in the early 2000s. The band released 3 albums in the 2000s though. Barty cannot count, but they all went platinum. That being said, I'm not sure if I would have put them on this list. Not that they're not great, but I guess I just didn't factor Foo Fighters as a massive 2000s band. That's clearly a me issue, as Dave Grohl and company were still a force in music in that time period. I just always saw the Foo Fighters becoming a massive deal in the 90s. But then again, Foos didn't even start until the mid-90s, so if you think of it that way, they were in that cross-section between decades for the band's first 10 years. Foo Fighters just kind of transcend time for me. Should the band not be on the best 2000s rock bands list? I mean, it's a fair entry, and only soulless monsters would actively hate the Foo Fighters. I mean, Barty doesn't even have a soul. He's a robot, and he still likes Foo Fighters. So Google Bard threw a curveball at me, but if the curveball is Foo Fighters, I can't be mad about it.
3. The White Stripes. The White Stripes was one of the most influential rock bands of the 2000s. They released a string of critically acclaimed albums in the decade, including Elephant and Get Behind Me, Satan. The White Stripes were also known for their stripped-down sound and energetic live shows.
Jack and Meg were definitely massive names in the 2000s, and they made iconic music in this time that is still played today. Energetic live shows with stripped-down sound is also a great description, but I'm surprised with Google Bard ranking them number 3 on this list. That is high praise for the duo. I understand the reasoning for being associated with the best of 2000s rock bands. I mean, this fits like a glove. I just don't know if I would have put them so high and over so many other bands like Muse and The Killers, and also including bands that didn't even get on the list like the Mars Volta. This one is tricky, but I do think there is a solid argument for them here. The White Stripes are iconic in many ways. I mean, the albums they put out like Elephant, and just that image of Jack and Meg. I mean, once Seven Nation Army dropped, it kept playing for the rest of the 2000s. The more I think about it, the more I realize Barty made a strong choice for putting the White Stripes on here.
2. Linkin Park. Linkin Park was another hugely successful rock band of the 2000s. They released their most popular album, Hybrid Theory, in 2000, which sold over 30 million copies worldwide. Linkin Park also won 2 Grammy Awards in the 2000s, including Best New Artist and Best Rock Album for Hybrid Theory.
1. I wholeheartedly agree that Linkin Park should be on this Best 2000s Rock Band list, and 2. If you saw the previous video of Worst 2000s Rock Bands, you were most likely very confused because Linkin Park was also number 2 on that list. Proving once again that Google Bard is not good AI, but it's also hilarious to ask Barty questions. Unfortunately, Linkin Park did not win the Grammy for Best Rock Album with Hybrid Theory. Barty got a little bit too excited and got confused. Again. I guess Linkin Park did win Grammys for their 2000s work, however, and also the albums like Hybrid Theory and Meteor alone earned Linkin Park a spot on this list. Minutes to Midnight did great also, and even if people don't love it as much, I think it's solid. All the accolades I can give Linkin Park have already been said in past videos on this channel, and I feel many people would agree that Linkin Park belongs on the list. This list. Top 10 best 2000s rock bands, not the previous one. Google Bard, you would think, would be the most knowledgeable and understandable AI to process and relate information. Not at all. Barty is one confused heavy music fan.
1. Green Day. Green Day was one of the most successful rock bands of the 2000s, and they continue to be popular today. They released 2 of their most critically acclaimed albums in the decade, American Idiot and 21st Century Breakdown, which both went multi-platinum. Green Day also won 5 Grammy Awards in the 2000s, including Album of the Year for American Idiot.
Talk about unexpected choice for the best rock band of the 2000s, at least for me. Part of that because I think of Green Day as a 90s band when I was a little kid and Dookie came out, and that's what I grew up with along Nimrod. That argument doesn't mean much though, as the next generation can say the same thing for American Idiot, which dominated the mid-2000s. I was invited to be on the Rizzuto Show on 105.7 The Point. Please subscribe to their channel, by the way. It's great, link in the description and info card. And I brought this entire list up to them. It was Moon on the show who said that Green Day really set an example for reinventing themselves. He's right. Think about how much of a pivot Green Day made from Dookie to American Idiot at roughly 10 years apart. Keep in mind that Warning came out in the year 2000, which totally counts and is brutally underrated for Green Day's discography. And then in 2009, with 21st Century Breakdown, you have more than enough music to work with. They did win Grammys in the 2000s, but not for Album of the Year. But Barty doesn't understand Grammys. Neither do I. Grammys don't understand themselves. I made a whole video about that last year. The main point, though, is that Green Day definitely have an argument for being one of the best rock bands of the 2000s. The best? Number 1? I don't know, but Google Bard sure thinks so. This is a hard list to fill out when you think of how many big names came out of this decade, which is why I wanted to try an AI response with it. Is this messy and misinformed in some aspects? Absolutely. Are there good choices on here? Yeah, definitely. The 2000s rock scene was wide with so many subgenres and fusions, as well as standard rock and roll, which only leads to more discussion of who was the best. If you're a Barty, you can just hedge your bets and say Linkin Park was both the best and worst at the same time. I love asking Barty music questions because it'll be a passionate but misinformed response, just like many music lovers on the internet.